My first memory of Mr. Bader was at Independence High School. It was actually 1992. He was my math teacher. He still has a huge influence on my life. He was that type of teacher that you wanted to make sure that was never disappointed in you. You wanted to make sure that you worked to the potential that he expected from you. And just, it's no small feat to keep the attention of teenagers, but he was spot on. He had our attention every day in class. Motivation. I can tell you, Mr. Bader is such a humble soul. We know him as being that man that gave so much to our country. Even, he had the Bronze Star, the Silver Star, a Purple Heart. He always has these stories to tell. But I think what keeps him going is seeing the change that he really still has on the children of Tangipahoa Parish. Watching him recently, for example, in a fourth grade classroom, he was substituting for one of our fourth grade math classes. And I went in, of course, just to give him a hug and a kiss and to tell him good morning. And I just stopped in the threshold, and every child was looking forward, just listening to him speak. And it just kind of reminded me of a time when he was my teacher. And I think that he still sees that he makes the difference in the students here. And as long as he still sees that and they are still loving him just as much as I did, he'll continue to do what he does best.
My name is William Bader, and I was born in Norwood, Massachusetts, 1923. The neighborhood's children, all of us couldn't speak English because we were foreign born. When we went to school, it was up to the first grade teacher to teach us English. 90% of the kids probably taught their parents English once they learned English in school. If they learned any English, they taught their parents English. My dad planted a garden, and during the season, my mother put up 62 quart jars of tomatoes, 62 quart jars of pole beans. That's how we ate. And by the way, this was during the Depression in the 20s. That's how we ate. We ate from the cool room in the cellar. During the Depression, my family did not miss a good meal with 60 chickens and the things that my mother put up for the winter. We did not miss a good meal. In Boston, they didn't have a garden. They had investments. The foreigners did not miss a meal. They were poor to start with as far as money was concerned, so they didn't have to rely on the industrial world. We never missed a good meal during the Depression, the whole Depression. Life was beautiful, very seldom. We never had an argument with 5 boys and 2 girls and my mom and dad. We never locked our doors. If you want to play, go down the cellar, put the mattresses on the floor, do what you want. That was the mode during that time. You trusted your neighbor. And then when you had holidays, you think you know how to make a pizza? You make pizzas like this, people. And used to swap meals. Some people really were good. From there on, graduated from high school, and it was time to go into the service. Before I had a chance to go into the service, I had 3 brothers who volunteered before I did. And so when I went to Boston to file an application to go into service, I brought it home to my mother. She says, I'm not going to sign it because you're the last son home. And I told her, well, they're going to draft me. And she says, well, if that's the way it's going to be, it's going to be, but I'm not going to sign the paper. So eventually I got drafted. This is how it was during World War II. Don't ever ask a World War II soldier, how did you feel when you went in the service? There was no feeling. The feeling was allegiance. We were glad. They all went. Almost my whole graduating class went. And then when the first one that got killed, you felt sorry for it. I was was shipped to Camp Landing, Florida. From there, we took a train ride to New York, got a boat, and went overseas. We bivouacked in France for about 6 weeks, about 30 miles from Paris. It was time for us to go up the front line. The war was getting a little bad because the Germans had surrounded General McAuliffe's army in Belgium and Luxembourg. So we were shipped to about 50 miles from the front line, someplace in northern France. From there, we went on to the borderline between France and Belgium and Luxembourg. And we joined the 5th Division. That was General Patton's 3rd Army. And our job there was to prepare for battle. We bivouacked there in the snow. And it was cold. Believe me, it was cold. And we were waiting for orders to move up on the front lines. We had a big meal the day before Christmas. They had a meal for all of us, a big meal. And the very next day, we moved up to the front lines. On my way to the front lines, I saw this young man across the ditch sitting down, and I remembered him from the way he looked, that he was one of my classmates. I said, "Johnny, what's wrong with you?" He said, "Willie, my feet are frozen. I can't go any further." He was in the platoon in front of mine. He couldn't go any further. We continued our march until we got to the fighting zone. The captain stopped the advance on our part, and we sort of spread out. We had to be careful. This was the dangerous area. The Germans, prior to our advance, changed all the road signs that they could. If you didn't know where you were going, it would be dangerous. We got to a certain area, and the captain ordered all of us to dig foxholes. Every one of us had about 2 cans of TNT on our straps. If we couldn't penetrate the ground, we used the TNT to blow open the ice or crack the ice so we can build a foxhole. We stayed in this position, for about 2 days or 3 days to make sure that our scouts that we sent out to reconnoiter the area that we were supposed to get to had the right information. I think it took us about 2 weeks fighting in this static area. A static area is where the enemy, you know where the enemy is and they know where you are. And somehow or other they quit fighting each other for some reason. But from the static area, we made a mad run, our company did, to break the hole into the German line, which we did with the help of other regiments. And from there we broke open a hole into the Germans' line. This part became very tough because the Germans were fighting now on their own ground. Before, they were always fighting on the enemy's ground. Now they're fighting on their home ground. And it was very, very difficult fighting. We lost a lot of men on this battle right here. But we broke open it. The Germans retreated across the Rhine River. And we got orders to stop. Once we put the Germans on the run, and they crossed the Rhone River, we made an effort to cross the Rhine River, and it cost a lot of men. And after this point, about 2 or 3 weeks passed by, and this is when the captain told Tony, "I want to promote him." And Tony said, "Well, the present attack that we're going to have now was a serious one." So when we made this attack, we went to take the town that we were supposed to take, and there was no Germans there. So the captain called Regiment And regiment says, well, take that little town about 4 or 5 miles north of you. Take that little dairy town there. So we started in that direction, and we walked about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We walked in a westerly direction. The sun was in our eyes. We sent out patrols, they didn't come by. It was a dairy town that we were headed to. Meadows, big meadows to the right of us. And we walked, and there was a big dairy barn, very big one. We got within about 20 or 30 feet from the barn, and there was machine gun fire that opened up on us from our rear. The rear to the right. There was Germans and machine guns with camouflage on the meadows. There was dug in there, and they shot to our back, and we all ran in the barn. About 40 or 50 men ran in the barn. Once in the barn, we returned our fire to the field. But there was a Tiger tank about 150 yards in the field with them, camouflaged. Sergeant Campo, who was in the barn with us, said, call regiment and tell them that we need cannon fire. And I want to see the radio man, the medic, and you, Willie. Come on over this corner of the barn after you make that decision to call. So Crow, who was the radio man, called regiment. Regiment says, we need coordinates. Well, we couldn't see. Hit the smoke that's coming from the roof of the barn that we're in. If we hit the smoke and you're in it, we're going to kill some of you. Well, that's okay. So they barraged the barn. One of the shells hits the barn. The radio man and the medic and me in the middle, we're within 2 inches of each other, one behind the other. The medic falls forward dead. I can tell he's dead. I can't see him, but there's no communication with him at all. And I have metal in my shoulder. That eliminates the sergeant that called me. He's gone too. So I'm there by myself standing. This other sergeant, who was to my left, sitting down, I didn't see him, but he said he was sitting down. He says, I'm hurt, Willie. So I walk over there, and sure enough, he's sitting down. I says, where is it, Tony? He said, my leg and my arm. Take a football and cut it off the halfway, the long way. That was the size of his wound on his thigh. And he had almost the same kind of wound on his arm. I said, Tony, let's try to get out of here. And we crawled to the door. I opened it. There was a Tiger tank shooting at shadows. We crawled across the road. And in my story, I always stop here because I don't know how I can get that 180-pound man 150 yards along a tree line to a Jeep. I did. The next thing was sitting on the fender of the Jeep. I said, you better get Tony out of here, he's hurt real bad. And Tony says, how about you, Willie? You're hurt. Yeah, but there's 5 men left in the barn. I'm going back to the barn. I have to help them out. So Tony disappears in the Jeep that they had there. And I went back to the barn. I walked back to the barn. It's a tree line, so I have cover. I get to the road, I have to crawl across it because that tank is still shooting. And I crawl into the barn. We get into the barn. Daylight is almost coming to being. We get in there, and there was about 5 left in the barn. We better get out of here. And let's all get out of here in a hurry, too. Which way, Willie? Take that door over there. You lose sense of direction, no matter what anyone says. 5 in a barn, there's a time lapse between I got Tony and I got to these 5 men. There's a time lapse there. Then there's a time lapse we've fought a little bit. But it's time for us to get out there because the sun is coming up. So I point to that door, we go out that door, we run on a big grassy meadow for about 150 yards. We see 2 Germans walk into a brook with their helmets and a towel. They ran one way back where they came from, and we ran another direction. We got up this hill. One of the soldiers says, I can read German. There was 2 dirt roads that crossed on top of the meadow. He didn't get within 100 yards of that thing. They opened up with him with a 50 caliber machine gun. So we run down the hill for about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and get to the bottom of the hill. And we checked each other. The fellow that said he can read German, he had a bullet hole through his cheek, went in his mouth and out the cheek. He was all right, and they asked me, how am I doing? I said, my back is great. There's nothing wrong with my back. I got metal in my back. How about your head? I did this, I don't remember. Still there. I laughed. Look at your helmet. You don't believe this, that's your tough luck. I had a bullet hole through my steel helmet the size of a quarter, almost. Right here, and it come out here. Now, if you say this part of my story is I'll go to the death house with it. That bullet hole was front and back in the same position. And if you say that helmet was in the air, that steel helmet is almost a quarter of an inch thick, not quite, and then it has a plastic helmet. If you're telling me that steel helmet was up above my head, the bullet hole went through it, and came right down on it again, you're mistaken. I don't believe it. That's the truth of my story there. Oh, I don't know how long it took for us to get to Berlin. But the war was over before we completely got to Berlin. When this was done, the treaty was signed, and it was time to make decisions for me, whether I'm going to the Pacific or whether I'm going home. And I told my captain, after we got promoted, he got promoted to battalion commander, and I got promoted to battalion NCO. His orders for me was to keep him out of trouble, read his mail, but keep him out of trouble, and put the officers on duty. And that's what I did for about a month. And then I said goodbye to the service. Prior to the war, this boy that I graduated with got a scholarship to Southeastern. Went to Southeastern, played 2 years there. Then he went into the war. When he came back from the war, he went back to Southeastern. At that time, the influx of the GI Bill of people that want to go to college was tremendous. There was a big waiting list up in the Northeast. So Angelo, who was the person that got the scholarship, called me up, called Jim Tom up, called Eddie Bowles up, and said, look, they're looking for athletes down here. Baseball, football, basketball. Come down. And we did. About 1945, 46, I came to Southeastern, and I played 2.5 years of baseball for Southeastern. I got married in the meantime in 47. I got married, and I needed the money, so I played minor league baseball while I was going to school at Southeastern. But after about 4 years of playing at Southeastern, The team, Hammond Berries, was the team that I played for. They disbanded, and they sold me to Port Arthur, Texas. I went down there and played one summer. Then I came back to Southeastern and stayed there because I didn't like Port Arthur. And I stayed there and I got my teaching degree, and I finished, 51, I believe. I got my teaching degree. Then I worked, I went to Southeastern for my master's, and I went to mostly night classes. Took me 10 years to get my master's, not because that I wasn't teachable. It was because I was refereeing. I became a referee, and I supplemented my teaching salary with my refereeing. I refereed football, basketball, and baseball. I became about 35 years I refereed all three of those sports. I became assignment secretary to Livingston Parish, Tangipahoa, and St. Tammany. About 50 plus schools I used to assign basketball officials to. And I love to teach. If the child was doing bad in math, my math class, I'll see you from 7 to 7:45. My class starts at 7:45. I had a class before class, and I had a class during class. Now, the one before class didn't guarantee that the one during class you would pass. You'd have to do both work, get double dose. And I don't think I failed 10 students in all my years I taught school. That was at Independence. I taught 10 years there, full-time after I retired. I always had a class before class if the students were failing. And I didn't fail too many students for that reason.